what the hell is R value? Hey guys, welcome back. Chris with Willow Hikes. If you're new here, this channel is for beginner backpackers. We've got all kinds of content for people that are interested in getting started in backpacking, so consider subscribing and have a look around. Today, I want to talk about R value. Now, if you are brand new, you may have no idea what I'm talking about. But if you've been researching or looking around on the internet or on YouTube to get started in backpacking, you have probably seen or heard the term R value. So I'm here to kind of give you an idea of what that means. All right, so when we talk about R value, we're talking about sleeping pads. This is the pad that's going to go underneath you while you're camping. A lot of people who are just getting started think that you get a sleeping pad just to keep you off the ground so you're not having sore hips and, sleeping on the hard ground. And that is half of the reason why you do that. The other half, however, is to keep from getting cold. Now, just quickly, when you get a sleeping bag, it's going to be rated to a certain degree temperature. Having said that, if you're sleeping directly on the ground, you're going to get cold because all of that insulation is going to be compressed underneath you where you're laying directly on it. It needs to have some loft and some airspace in order to keep you warm and insulate you. So that's why we use a sleeping pad. Sleeping pad underneath gives you that same insulation. And that amount of insulation is determined by something called R value. Okay, so what's R value stand for? The R in R value means resistance. It is thermal resistance. And basically what R value is a resistance to conduction of heat, of cold. Conduction meaning basically cold surface against another surface conducts that cold to the other surface. So having a sleeping pad with some insulation can stop some of that conduction. And this was evidenced by me having a pretty good sleeping bag the first time I went up Mount Hood, sleeping at about 9,000 feet on the snow. And I froze all night because I had a crappy sleeping pad. I shivered all night, and not because my sleeping bag wasn't good enough. It was because all of that cold from the snow and the ground below me was passing right through that pad, right into my body. And so, R value is going to determine how much of that is going to be blocked, and also how much of your heat coming from your body is going to be reflected back to you. So a while back, we talked about temperature ratings for sleeping bags. And sleeping pads are similar in that there is now a standard for R value. Now, previous to 2020, there was no standard. So there were brands releasing sleeping pads that gave them an R value that was completely arbitrary. And since this standardization, some of those pads have actually changed the R value, even though the pad hasn't changed. So nowadays, for the most part, if you get a sleeping pad and you look at the R value, it's going to be generally, as long as they're using this standard, comparable across the board with other brands. And now, I'm sure you're wondering, okay, what R value do I need for certain temperatures, like sleeping bags, 20-degree bags, 0-degree bags? It's a little more complicated with the sleeping pads because there's no direct correlation between, say, an R value of 3 and a certain temperature. But overall, you can get an idea of how warm it's going to be for what season. So basically, our value is going to go from 1 to 7 and above. And the higher that number is, the warmer it's going to keep you in cold temperatures. So generally speaking, an R value of 1 to 2, that's going to be good for the summer months when it doesn't get very cold at night. So if you use a pad like that and it's 0 degrees out, you're going to get cold. But if it's 100-degree temperature, it only gets down to 70 or 80 degrees at night. Our value 1 to 2 is going to be fine. Now, as we move into the shoulder seasons, you're going to want a little more insulation. And so at that point, you're going to kind of want to look into 2, 3, 4 numbers like that. Basically above 2 is going to keep you warmer as it gets colder. So, you know, early fall, late spring, you're going to want something with a little bit more R value. Now, if you get into the winter months, you're going to want something like 4, 5, 6 if it's getting down to freezing. And if you're doing extreme weather camping and it's getting below 0, you're going to want something with an R value of even higher. Now, as with most things in backpacking, the higher you go, the more expensive it's going to be. So extreme weather pads, extreme cold pads, things with an R value of 6 and up are generally very expensive, and things with an R value of 1 or 2, generally a lot cheaper, and generally a lot lighter because they don't require any extra insulation. So how do we achieve a higher R value? Well, basically you're adding insulation to this air pad, and that can be with foam inside of it. It could have reflective materials. It could have a number of things or a combination of things. And because of that, as you add those things, it's going to get heavier and it's going to be more expensive. Okay, so the standard that they're using now, it's the ASTM R value standard, American Society for Testing and Materials. Not really important who they are, but it is a standard that they use now. And if you're buying a sleeping pad, it should say when it lists the R value that they're using that standard. Otherwise, it might be a little questionable, right? And I'm not going to get into how they test these. There's actually some great videos out there. I'd really be surprised if Stephen from My Life Outdoors hasn't shown how these are tested, so you might check him out. But basically, this pad that they're testing goes between 2 plates, one which is kept at about 95 degrees Fahrenheit, the other one around 42, and then there's sensors to test how much energy it takes to maintain that heat. And that's the quick and dirty of how they test those. But at least by doing that, they get a standard. So you can know in general, if you buy a pad with a lower R value, it's not going to keep you warm in colder weather. And as those numbers go up, you're going to get more insulation and sleep warmer. Now, as a side note, going back to my video on temperature ratings, in looking into R value, I discovered that the temperature ratings for sleeping bags are assuming that you're using a sleeping pad with an R value of 5.38 or higher. So keep in mind, if you buy a 20-degree bag and it's getting 20 degrees out and you have a sleeping pad with an R value of 1 or 2, you're going to be really cold. If you have a sleeping pad with an R value of 4, you may still be really cold. And that can definitely contribute into deciding that your sleeping bag is lying to you when it says it has a certain temperature rating. So something to think about. And yeah, your sleeping bag isn't lying to you unless, you know, you ate some funny mushrooms or something. But all right, so what sleeping pad should you buy? I want to say very clearly, do not assume that because a pad costs more money, it's going to be better all around, or better in any way, or keep you any warmer because it costs more money. Case in point, this is a sleeping pad from Big Agnes. They have really expensive gear. This is a really expensive pad. The reason I have this pad, believe it or not, is this came from a Goodwill, brand new, $4.99. This originally retailed for well over $100. It is pretty thick, keeps you off the ground, even if you're a side sleeper, and it has a whopping R value of 1. So this is going to keep you warm if it's 80 degrees out. Take this into 40-degree weather, you're going to be freezing your butt off. And this thing costs over $100. Meanwhile, you can pick up something like this at your local Walmart for probably $100 less than the other pad. And this has an R value of 2. So this is twice as warm as that. Now, is that how it works? R value of 2, twice as warm as an R value of 1? Yeah. In fact, R value is stackable. So if I bought more of these and I stacked them up, this has an R value of 2. I can put it on top of another one that has an R value of 2. I now have an R value of 4. That is how it works. So you want to stay warmer, you can't afford an expensive pad, that'll work. Of course, I don't see carrying 2 or 3 of these on my backpack, but you kind of get the point. Shop around, look around. The pad I use, Nemo Tensor insulated. I believe it's an R value of 4.5. It's worked really well for me when it gets cold. I have a Climate Static V, which everybody who starts out generally will end up with that because it's sold at Walmart and just about everywhere. That has an R value of 1.2. And I recently saw a review of a sleeping pad with an R value supposedly 7.2. And you would imagine that would cost an enormous amount of money. And that is from Trekology. It is the UL R7. Yeah, that's it. 7.2 R value. Sells for like 60 or 70 bucks on Amazon, apparently. I do want to give credit to Top Shelf Backpacking YouTube channel for turning me on to that idea. Now, because it's got a higher R value, it's a bit heavier than a lot of these, but that would make sense. But for that price, if that's true, that proves you don't have to spend a bunch of money to get some good insulation from a sleeping pad. So overall, R value is just going to give you an idea of how warm it's going to be for you, just like your sleeping bag. So generally, low 1 to 2, going to be good in the summer. 3 to 4, shoulder seasons. As we get into winter, you kind of want to get towards 6. But if you're just starting out backpacking and going in the summertime, that's fine. But do not buy something like this for 160 bucks when it basically has the same R value as the blow up floaty that you get for $5. So just keep in mind, paying more money isn't going to give you necessarily the best pad for you. You want something comfortable? If you have a chance to go to an REI, lay on these, find what works for you, but do pay attention to R value if you plan on going backpacking when it gets colder out there. So that's all I've got for you today. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you next week.